and welcome to another night of wargaming with Peter. And tonight we have On Target Simulations with us again. Thanks for coming again. And we're going to be doing a walkthrough of a scenario. And I will just go for it and turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, hi. My name is Jeff Sugden. I'm one of the developers for Flashpoint campaigns over on Target Simulations. Um, I've got this is kind of like my second career. My first career was U.S. Army as an infantryman, and from the time period that this game is made about, so I've got a lot of experience doing this kind of stuff from long ago. This particular thing we're going to talk about tonight. It's not a walkthrough; it's a crawl through. All right, so this is from the standpoint of training. Crawl, then you walk, then you run. This is somebody speaking back. There we go. So from a training standpoint, of course, the first stage is you crawl, and this is very much a crawl scenario. The central theme is gap crossing, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But there are some other themes that are very helpful to new players, and some of those are things like how do you use reconnaissance assets during the attack? Um, how do you use and synchronize indirect fire? What's the cadence? What are the steps in general for doing an attack? And then in the particulars, we're going to talk about gap crossing. Um, so what's gap crossing? And basically a gap, and there's two broad categories of gaps. There's wet gaps and there's dry gaps, right? And a gap is anything that makes you stop driving, basically. Okay. So wet gaps are large, deep rivers or lakes that mean that you need either ferries or amphibious vehicles, or you got to build a bridge. Dry gaps, there's quite a few different kinds. The two predominant ones that we kind of gravitate to are minefields, and then in Flashpoint campaigns we just kind of call them obstacles. Actually, all of them are obstacles. They're just different kinds of obstacles. A minefield is an obstacle because it acts to counter the mobility of the other side. Anti-tank ditches are an obstacle. Triple strand concertina, another kind of obstacle. Log cribs, dragon's teeth, even cratering charges in a road intersection that make you have to drive off the road around the crater. And so what does that do to your resupply rate? There's all those kinds of things. So like I said, there's a number of different kinds of gaps. The thing is that the procedure for dealing with them doesn't really differ according to what kind of gap it is, right? The equipment you might use differs, but the steps that units go through, the steps that you, a player, have to go through to negotiate a gap are the same. And of course, the military loves acronyms. And so for gap crossing, the U.S. Army acronym is called SOSRA. And these are the steps that you take when you want to cross a gap. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a river that you have to build a bridge across, or it's a minefield that you have to go find the mines and blow them up and move them out of the way so people can drive through the minefield, or it's a wire obstacle that you've got to either cut wire up or blow a lane into it, right? It's all the same. The procedure at the unit level is the same. And the first step is you have to suppress. And um, and what you want to do is the biggest thing is you want to protect your breaching force, right? So if there is an obstacle of some kind that a defender puts in place, um, the best thing to do is put it in a place and have people watch it and shoot at the people that try to poke holes through it. And then it lasts a lot longer, and it messes up the enemy's plans. You can, of course, throw something out, and not have somebody watching it, and it's a little bit of a speed bump, maybe 15, 20 minutes. But if nobody's shooting at it, whether it's, using rifles or tank guns or artillery, it's of negligible value. So given that, then obviously the biggest target when you're attacking and trying to breach through a gap, whether it's the engineers that are building a bridge, or it's the infantry who's blowing up mines, or throwing a Bangalore torpedo into a wire fence, the biggest thing is you want to protect your breaching force. And so the first thing you do is you suppress. In fact, you want to do your suppression and begin that as people are moving forward to start poking a hole into the gap. The next thing is you want to obscure. And so it's not just about protecting the breaching assets, it's also about protecting the people who have to go through the breach you're making. Because the reason you make a breach is to pass other forces through to press on the attack. And then, there's a typo there. The secure, you want to clear enemy who could interfere with things. So again, the notion is there is an obstacle of some kind. You're gonna put a hole through it, and the enemy is watching it and shooting. So once you get through that obstacle, you need to either kill or displace the guys that are watching the hole you made, and then you can pass through friendly units, and then wreak havoc.
Is this usually in real life, or back from your experiences? Is this usually composed of a single unit that knows this method, holistically? Or, I mean, is this a very dynamic thing, or is it a very particular unit that
It's a bread and butter thing, but it's widely spread. So, for example, I show up in Germany in 1990, spring of 1990, my first mechanized unit. I've been light infantry, light airborne Ranger Battalion, light infantry, 7th Infantry Division. I armored vehicles were targets to me up to that point. So then I get to Germany, and now I'm in a mechanized battalion in a tank heavy brigade. Well, it's totally different, right? And I find out as a squad leader, I'm a squad leader in a mechanized company that is habitually cut over and swapped with a tank company in an armored battalion, in a tank battalion, right? So when I go to train, do tactical training, I'm I'm part of a tank battalion. I'm part of a tank company, right? And in fact, yeah, and it's like, okay, so what do I do? What good am I doing? Right? I got a dragon. I can kill tanks with that. I got, shoulder fired rockets. I can kill tanks with that. And what I was taught was like, no, your main thing is you're a mobility asset. Like, what do you mean? Well, at some point we're going to run across obstacles, wire or mines, and your job is to punch holes through that. And we would train for that. I mean, that was the bread and butter thing that I did. That was like the top list of my mission essential task list wasn't fire and maneuver of my squad. It was breaching minefields. And so I had to get my guys, and I had to learn to understand how to do it. Like, the tank company that I'm with runs up on a minefield. They're going to call my squad forward, and I've got 10 minutes to breach a minefield, 100 meters deep. And that's, so it is very much, and it depends on where in the force you're at, right? So if you're talking about like an air mobile brigade or something like that, no, they don't do that, right? But if you're talking about mechanized and armored forces, then those guys train, at least Americans, they train for that. Now it's different in different armies, right? So like in a Soviet tank company, you've got one tank per platoon that's got mine plow mounted on it, and they do their own thing, right? They don't use infantry to breach minefields. They use a tank plow. They use a tank plow that's on a tank. Americans didn't do that. So there's wrinkles, across different nations and even across force elements inside of a nation. But where I was at, and in that fits to this game very much for the U.S. Whether or not you had an engineer squad or an engineer platoon or a mechanized infantry platoon, pretty much interchangeable as far as breaching goes. Like learning how to make Bangalore torpedoes from scratch with a pile of C4 and U-shaped pickets that you would use to anchor fences with, right? You learn how to do that stuff and you practice it.
Did it go by a different name in the field? Like the actual order would be just a we're gonna do a breach and scoot, or you know what I'm saying? Like they wouldn't have used this acronym in the field. You know, they wouldn't say we're gonna
No, no,
actually.
actually, you use the acronym as your guide, right? This is your touchstone,
Sure.
right? This is on your cheat sheet 3x5 card in your breast pocket.
Okay.
The command would be, we would call it an in stride breach, right? That was like you roll up on something, and the difference between a deliberate breach and an in stride breach is that when you do an in stride, it's for your company, and you're not going to hand it over to anybody else. The marking is minimal, and you have the people that did the breach are guiding the drivers through the breach. When you do a deliberate breach, which is what we're going to do in this scenario, it's a different thing, right? So you're making a breach that's going to be, common to everybody.
Right.
And in fact, as the battle progresses, you would actually hand over the breach site to another unit, and they
Uh,
would bring their guys through. So you got to do the coordination. It's like, okay, here's this lane, here's the left limit, here's the right limit. Let's walk through it. All right, here's the exit, here's the end
yeah,
of the minefield, all that kind of stuff.
I think that's why I asked it. It just seems like it seems like there are additional logistic layers to that, and that you more often than not would do an in unit. You know, we would do the first thing you said. You would do an in unit one, right?
Yeah, you do an in stride one
Yeah.
because, and you would do an in stride one. It's like, well, um, like this, like the Warsaw Pact is doing an attack, right? And so they got a flank. So what do you do about the flank? Well, one thing you can do is you can put units there to guard the flank, except that sucks away combat power, right? The other thing you can do is you could like lay down a bunch of mine belts, have somebody watch, and then while your enemy is dealing with your flank minefield, you have time to react, and then if you need to, suck off combat power to deal with that. And that's the approach the Soviets took. So they built a bunch of equipment that could lay down a bunch of mines really fast. And we're talking about, like 200 meters deep at, a couple of kilometers an hour that they could put mines down. That's fast. Man, that's fast. Because it's all done by machines, right? Whether they put them on the top or they had some that could kind of sort of bury them, but it didn't matter. Even if you see them, you got to deal with them, right?
Right. That was the
And it
intention.
and
More
it
than
takes you time, and somebody's watching, and they go, okay, we got a company on our south flank. And they've hit the minefield. Well, that buys time for the Soviet commander to say, okay, and they can take a reserve company and go deal with it. But they don't got to park one on the flank the whole time, right? And so it gives more flexibility.
Yeah, oddly enough, this is reminding me of ASW in naval warfare. It's interesting. There's some interesting parallels. So very good.
There's a lot of parallels that go across nations and across domains. It is interesting. Okay, so the R is reduced, which means that you're going to remove whatever it is that's going to slow you down. You're going to make a lane through it. And then the last thing is you have to assault, and you assume you're going to assault. You're either going to uh, destroy the enemy on the far side of the breach. In other words, make your breach safe and turn it into a highway passing point, as opposed to something you got to fight through. Which includes, like, you got to clear it far enough away that nobody can observe it and call artillery. So it could be a big space you have to clear out, or you're going to hand it over to a follow-on unit. One of those two. Okay, so I'm going to, like I said, this is a crawl kind of thing. So I'm going to throw you up some mission graphics here. And what we have for our forces is a tank heavy battalion task force of a 3-battalion tank heavy brigade. You see the big black lines going basically from southeast and northeast, or southwest and northeast, and that represents the sector boundaries. So our guys are going to be in that middle sector. Our guys are 377 armor. To the northwest is 48 infantry, and to the southeast is 577 armor. And this is a brigade I served in the early 90s. I was in 48 infantry, and I was in Charlie Company, and we were habitually cut over to 377 armor. So what we have is a battalion task force that's got 3 tank companies and a mechanized infantry company. Oh, hang on a second. Wrong thing. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can have a look at. And I've kind of got these guys laid out as kind of an org chart layout. So we've got the brigade headquarters. We've got the armor battalion headquarters. We've got 3 tank companies. And we've got a mechanized infantry company that's at this point in time, that unit had M113s. The tanks were the M1A1 with the depleted uranium armor. And there's kind of a historical reason for that. The brigade commander at that time was Colonel Paul Lentz, who was the battalion commander of the 1st Battalion to get M1s. And he and his guys did a great job with shaking those things out. So when it came time to get the latest version of the M1A1, of course, his brigade got those things first. We have a 4-deuce mortar platoon. We have a scout platoon, which at that date, if I recall correctly, they still had M113s, but by the fall of 1990, they turned them in, and they converted from M113s to Humvees. Listed down like this, a little bit lower, we have an engineer company, right? So in a heavy division, U.S. heavy division, you've got some other stuff, right? You've got artillery, you have engineers, and each, and those guys kind of belong to the brigade commander, and you would parcel those out according to the mission. And a combat engineer combat engineer company consisted of 2 combat engineer platoons. And the combat engineers in the U.S. Army were quite different from the engineers in a Warsaw Pact formation. The Warsaw Pact engineers basically were all engineering vehicle drivers and crews. They didn't have guys on the ground. The Americans retained these kind of highly skilled infantry guys. So they've got dragons, they've got machine guns, and they got a lot of explosives. And they know how to use them. But there's not as many of them in a company. You only have 2 platoons. And then the other thing is that the way the artillery worked in a U.S. heavy division is you had an artillery brigade of 3 battalions. Each battalion was allocated to do direct support for a brigade. On top of that, at the corps level, there were 2 artillery brigades. Each brigade had 3 tube artillery battalions and an entire battalion of MLRS and a Lance battalion. So basically, the one brigade would have supported division normally, and it doubled the artillery available. And inside the division, you had M155 batteries in the battalions, and one battery of like 9 MLRS, which was mostly dedicated to counterfires. And the MLRS at corps level was dedicated to counterfires. The corps level guys were very, very, very interested in tracking Warsaw Pact CBRN systems. So they weren't really generally available to like shoot at enemy tube artillery. So your counterfires were pretty much limited to the one battery, and it was like nine launchers, right, of MLRS at the division level, and the target acquisition battery had the counterfire radars. That's also at division level. So when I play, I don't put my guys on counterfire, right? If I have somebody on the ground that finds something, enemy mortar or artillery, sure, I may allocate a mission to it, but my style of play, matching like my historical experiences, is I don't put guys on counterfire. Now, so let's talk narrative here. Now, what's the big story, right? And you kind of need to do that whenever you build a scenario or a campaign, right? And the scenarios in a campaign, you kind of need to have a story. Okay, so let's talk about the cadence, the expected cadence of the war, right? So because of logistics constraints and terrain constraints, the Warsaw Pact couldn't shove their entire army in one giant attack. So what they did is they did echelons, and they did echelons, at the army level, and then that trickled down like into inside divisions, because you can only shove so much stuff through the terrain near the inner German border, because it's kind of rough in places. And you can only move so much material, fuel and food and water, ammunition, parts, lubricants, all that stuff. You can only move so much per day, so many tons per day. And it puts a constraint on how much combat power you can shove at your enemy per unit time. So what that comes down into is the notion that at the army level, we expected the Warsaw Pact would have a big surge, their first echelon. They would gain some ground, and at some point, they're gonna stop pushing with those guys, and then pass through the second echelon. And the big challenge was stopping the first echelon before the second echelon could pile on top of that first echelon fight. Because if the Warsaw Pact did that, we realized that we couldn't win, right? So we had to create breathing space in between the two echelons, and that was one of the drivers for the U.S. air-land battle doctrine, was to create that space. It's like if we can control the rate at which the Warsaw Pact feeds regiments into the NATO divisions, we can handle it. But if they can stack them up too deep, too quick, we can't handle it. And of course, the Soviets realized that as well, because they're going back to way back hundreds of years, battlefield calculus, right? It's scientific. If you pile enough stuff, you'll win. Go ahead.
Are there several ways with this game engine to simulate any aspects of that from a scenario design perspective? Are there certain rates of any repair and or replacement?
It's not so much about rates of repair. Well, maybe maybe in the campaign, but the real thing is you build the story around each successive scenario, right? And you say, well, okay, they did this, and here's their combat power. Deal with it. You're it's kind of like that.
So there usually isn't a built-in ammunition or supply rate.
Not at this point. I mean, and we're having discussions about that. It's like, okay, so for example, and this gets down into the weeds, in conversation with players, right? Like, why can't I shoot? Why won't you let me shoot ATGMs at APCs if I'm a NATO player? And that's because, well, there's only so many ATGMs in Europe in the bunkers, and that's what you count on for the war. Those are the war stock reserves are in theater, right? You're not counting on resupply across the Atlantic Ocean, right? It's a short war. It's a like 2, 3, 4 week war. So you're not thinking about I'm going to bring more ammo on boats from the U.S. That is not an option. It's what's in the bunkers in Germany. Okay. And so how many tanks do, in the late 80s, do the Soviets have that they could bring forward? And yeah, they're like, okay, it's T-72s and T-80s, but there's a whole bunch of T-62s. There's a whole bunch of T-55s. And back then, those, they're using them in Ukraine now, but back then they were in good shape, right? The rubber seals weren't dried out and rotted out. They could roll them out and shoot them. They had the ammunition. So now you're talking like, okay, so the Warsaw Pact got 50,000 tanks that they could theoretically eventually push forward into the combat area. So what do I use missiles at? And I was a Bradley Master Gunner, company through division level, and like working on training doctrine at the Army level at some point. And it's like, what do you do? Right. So for example, there was only one fire command for tow missiles from a Bradley, and it was gunner missile tank. You didn't shoot missiles at anything other than a tank. And the reason for that was you had to conserve those munitions for that target type, because you don't know. I mean, yeah, there's a bunch in the bunkers, but how much risk is there about getting those missiles forward? And they're like 12 hours away from a 12-hour truck drive away. And I need them in 2 hours. And so that's a very real concern. And you end up tuning things munition versus target wise, like down at the platoon level. Not that the guys in the platoon are figuring that out, right? Other folks are figuring that out, and here's your criteria. Here's how you use your weapons. Here's how you use your munitions. And when you go out and qualify in the range, if you mismatch the munition to the target, even though it might kill the target, we're going to ding you for your score, right? As an incentive to get guys in the habit of matching up the desired munition for the desired target. And so, and what's kind of interesting about that whole logistics thing is there was a really huge logistic problem that really didn't come to the fore until Desert Storm. And in particular, what it was the fact that core artillery units had insufficient logistic transport. And they were set up, like the core artillery brigades and battalions were set up to drive trucks back to the ammo bunkers, like west of the Rhine or wherever, and bring ammo forward. So now you take them out of Germany, you put them somewhere else, and now they've got like 500-kilometer trip to get to the port where their ammo is, and they can't resupply themselves. So now, it's not just ammo. It's fuel, it's lubricants, it's parts, and so. And there was a paper written about this where it was like basically most of the core artillery units that went to Desert Storm only operated with their initial basic load. They never got an ammo resupply. There's a few where, guys in the lower level units, they made relationships and said, hey, can you give me 2 tons of space on this convoy? Yeah, I can give you 2 tons, and they get some ammo, right? But by and large, the system didn't provide for that. And I go back and look, I go back and think about this in Europe. It's like, well, would that work in this in this kind of conflict at that time? And wow, it's a big question. Interesting one. Okay, so anyways, let's go back to what we got here. So the narrative here is we've got a brigade, and they're tasked with punching a hole through the remnants of the first echelon. They're going to try and hold what ground they've gained so far. Okay, and we can speculate as to what's the purpose of punching the hole, right? Is it the division wants to send the division cavalry squadron through? Is it the corps wants to send an armored cavalry regiment through that? Is it a deeper attack and the division wants to send another of the brigades in the division? Doesn't really matter. Any of those things work. Any of those things make sense. What we've got is a brigade that has been tasked with punching a hole through the first echelon, has gotten to the point where they're going to hold what they got. Okay, so the brigade is basically online. We've got 3 battalions, and we're playing the center battalion. So what are the other 2 battalions doing, right? And the narrative I'm going to present here is that the other 2 battalions. Okay, so the brigade's facing a motorized rifle regiment, and they're going to attack. Which, on the surface, it's like, well, it's a 1-to-1 thing, right? Is that really realistic? And then you go, well, okay, so if the first echelon has gotten as far as they want to get with them, where are they at combat power wise? Probably somewhere like around 60 to 80%, somewhere around in there. I'm going to call it 70%. And I know that when you play the game at the hobby level, that you will play it till both sides are like, below 30%, but that's not realistic. The realistic thing is once you get to like about 70%, you start really thinking really hard about keeping fighting, because your force gets very brittle. And when you hit that 70%, now you really have to think about what pieces are at what levels, right? Because it's a synergistic thing. And you got to think about, like, okay, well, I got my tanks, I got my infantry, I got my mortars, I got my artillery, I've got my air defense, I've got my engineers, I've got my anti-armor stuff. And where are those things in relation to one another? And what does that do to my synergistic overall capability? How effective am I really, even though it's like 70% isn't 70%. It depends upon the mix and what's at what level. You can say overall you're 70%, but effectively you might be like 40% because you got no infantry or you got no tanks, right? Even though your end strength is 70% authorized, the mix matters. So when you get to that 70% thing, you can start going like, well, I don't know if I can do the mission you want me to do, boss, right? And you get down to like 50%, it's like, I probably will fail, right? And so then if you want to hold the ground that you got, at what point do you stop pushing? Is it 30%? Probably not, right? Because you're just remnants and can be brushed aside. And you're going to lose a whole bunch of ground you gained. All right, so I'm going to set the bar at 70% here and say the first echelon stopped. So what does the brigade do? And if you want to punch through somebody, one of the things you do is you use probably the bulkier force to essentially pin down the bulk of the other guy's force. You rob him of freedom of maneuver, and you do that by what we call a fixing attack. So the narrative here is that the two units on the brigades left and right, they're going to conduct fixing attacks. They're not trying to gain ground. They're not even trying to kill a lot of people. What they're trying to do is pin people down and keep them from moving, right? And so what does that do to my friendly combat power? It gives me a lot of latitude to restack that, because you don't need so much combat power to pin somebody down as you do to mow them down, right?
And the intention of that would be to pin them down for airstrikes or for artillery fire, primarily.
Neither one. What I'm doing is I'm keeping them from moving from the adjacent sectors into the middle sector where I'm fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm preventing reinforcement.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yep.
And then by doing that, what it does is it may free up more assets for me to use in the middle. In particular, what I'm doing is I'm going to take the entire brigade's artillery and focus it in the center sector. Now, that doesn't mean that the guys on the left and right don't have artillery. I'll pull those, as a brigade commander and as a division commander, I would pull the guys from corps and say, you're gonna fire missions for the guys doing the fixing attacks. What I want to use is my guys who are used to working with my other guys, right? Because that matters, right? They're not strangers, and it helps my guys do things more efficiently and more timely than if I use somebody from corps. And so I'm pooling, and let me zoom in. So this right hand, these guys, all right. So this is the entire battalion, artillery battalion, that supports 3rd Brigade, and I'm going to concentrate them in my attack sector, and I'm going to use strangers over here in 577 land and over here in 48 land, because they're essentially they're doing targets of opportunity, and all I want them to do is discourage movement across the sector boundaries. Okay, so we got that. Now, it's really tempting at this point for a lot of players to go, okay, I'm gonna task organize. And what that means is that I'm going to take this company of infantry, and I'm going to spread them across the battalion and make as much combined arms at the lowest level that I can, right? And that's usually not a bad thing to do in most cases. In fact, back then during training, you did that, right? So what you would end up with is this company would take 1st platoon and send it over here and swap a platoon with that tank company. And then, okay, so we're going to do the same thing with 2nd platoon, and we'll put it in Bravo tank. And then what I end up with is 3 companies that are tank heavy, but they got infantry, so they're combined arms. And I only have 1 company that's tank pure. And that's not a bad way to train, right? But much like a brigade by TO&E does not own battalions, right? A brigade by TO&E is like a brigade headquarters. And how many battalions are in a brigade? Yeah, in garrison and in training, you've got this brigade's got 4 battalions, and the other brigades got 3 battalions, and they're composed like that. But for combat, by doctrine, it was like, well, when we go to do a battle, the division commander is going to look and see what he needs, what brigade to do what, and then flip battalions around. And so it's a very fluid organization that applies to this situation. And the same thing would happen inside of a brigade. Even though in training, you got this habitual, okay, every time Every time 377 goes to Hohenfels, I'm going to Hohenfels because my company goes with 377 to Hohenfels. Okay, fine. That's in peacetime training. It's not a combat thing. And I'm going to utilize that here in this because before you task organize, what you really need to know is what are your tasks, right? So you kind of need a plan. You need to figure out what the tasks are, and then you're gonna organize your forces to do those tasks. All right. So I had said that this is a crawl scenario, and the thing that makes it a crawl scenario is how much information I'm giving. I'm given at this point as a Blue 4 commander. So I've got this, maneuver graphic overlay. And what I've got are, I know exactly where all the minefields are. I know where the improved positions are, where the enemy's dug in at. I don't know what's there, but I know that they're dug in there. And I also know the location of the wire obstacles in between the companies. Now, here's kind of an interesting thing because let's talk about like if you want to go to crawl, to walk, to run, how would I approach that with this layout? And a lot of it has to do with how much information I give the player. So in the crawl phase, I'm giving where's everybody and I'm giving a plan, right? And so in the crawl phase, it's like I need to execute this plan, right? I want to move guys up along this axis. I'm going to put in 2 breaches. And in real life, each one of these breaches through the minefield is actually 2 lanes. Each one of those could handle a battalion, right? And I'm doing 2 of them to provide redundancy in case one of those fails, right? I don't want to have like one place I'm going to breach and then everybody dies and I don't get the breach in. I'll be in a bad place. So I put redundancy in there for that. And then let's talk about these. And these are actually pre-battle indicators, right? So like when the Warsaw Pact would decide to do a deliberate defense, the first thing they would do is they'd figure out, okay, we're going to put our companies in here, here, and here. And then the next thing they do is they start building obstacles between the companies, right? And so these things are defining the boundaries between companies. Well, why do that first? How does that help things? Well, what it does is if there is a breach, the next thing you want to do is you want to kind of attack along the flank. Well, but now there's obstacles in between each of the companies. So each company has a breathing space to react and respond to. So when the Warsaw Pact is doing a real deal defense because you see these obstacles going in first, right? And that's like 2 days before the battle, right? I mean, it takes a couple of days to build one of these things. I've done that with like pick and shovel, right? It's not easy and it takes a lot of time. And the first thing that Americans do is they dig in their individual holes. And then they start putting obstacles in front. And then maybe if there's time, they put the stuff in on the flanks. The Soviets put the stuff on the flanks first and then dig the individual stuff. And because they have the machinery to lay the mines, when they're digging in the individual holes, guys show up with these massive machines that they're like potato planters, but they plant mines instead, and they lay that stuff in. And that's usually at a minimum, it's a 100-meter belt of anti-tank mines, and then there's a 100-meter belt of really nasty anti-personnel crap with like lots of tripwires and bounding, bouncing Betty kind of things, and and it's nasty. One of the things that I learned, I mean, I'm like, like I said, I get to mechanized infantry land, and I get told you have to learn how to rapidly clear a mine, put a lane through a minefield. And I'm like, well, why don't we just like drive a Micklick up here? No, mine uh, clearing a line charge, and it's a trailer that's got a rocket with a big rope on it, and on the rope is a string of charge blocks, and it'll you shoot it across the minefield. It goes like 120 meters, and then it detonates, and it blows like a 10-meter wide lane. Right? It's like, why don't we use that? And it got, actually, the thing is, and this is, it's inside baseball. It's what I ended up calling the combined arms barbecue, right? So you work with guys in different kind of units, right? I work with tankers, I work with engineers, I work with air defense guys, and I'm trying to understand how it all works together. So it's like, I work with a guy in the field. We get done, had a good time. Hey, why don't you come on over for a barbecue? And we'll sit down and have a few beers and talk about it, right? It's like, so why don't we just shoot my Micklicks? He says, well, in our battalion, we got like 2 trailers with the rounds in them. And we're saving those in case we find just shy of your objective a minefield we didn't know about. And if you get that close, you got to blow it right away. You don't have time to like go out there and like when I'm doing in stride breach, right? My guys are out there with basically sharp sticks poking the ground looking for mines. Literally, sharp sticks poking the ground looking for mines. Mark it, put a charge on it, then we'll blow the charges. If you're at hand grenade range away from the enemy, you can't do that, right? It's suicidal. And that's when you use the line charges. It's like, okay, got it, understand, thanks. Anyways, so this is the crawl phase. We know where everything is, so we should be able to make, hopefully, a plan that works the first time through. And if not, then when we get done, we'll do a vivisection AAR and figure out what went wrong. So when I did this plan, what I looked at was the terrain, and you like to have big open areas that you can shoot armored vehicles in with your ATGMs. So we've got that. And that's why these guys are where they're at, right? They're pretty much blocking things up, and we're thinking about, we got 3 motorized rifle companies, a tank company, and not full strength, they're 70%. It's a BTR motorized rifle battalion, which means that they've got an anti-armor platoon inside a battalion. And there's also a regimental anti-armor platoon. We'll throw that in there too. And there's a tank company. All right, so there's a lot of stuff that could stymie a battalion trying to do an attack. The next thing is, when you look at like laying in minefields and defenses and stuff, you want to time into the terrain. All right, you want to make it so that you can't push a lot of combat power around the edge. And I think I've done this pretty good, because this southeast corner of the minefield and the defense, it's got high terrain, and it's not easy to drive track vehicles up these slopes. And then over here, we've got we've got a water obstacle, and it's tied into another slope. And I have set the battalion boundary to basically use and actually, if I was actually doing this, the sector boundary would run along this river. But just to make things a little bit easier to see on the map, I pushed it a little bit northwest, but the reality would be 377 would be forbidden from crossing that river. Like that would be outer sector, this would be in sector. And the reason for that, and this was an important thing back then, you didn't have a Blue 4 tracker, right? And so you had to worry about being in the wrong place at the wrong time because you may present yourself as a target to somebody who just sees a hot spot in the thermal sites. And it's forward, and do they know that there's a neighboring unit that's somebody's lost in the wrong place? Nope. So that was a really big thing, is that not only can you not cross your boundary, the effects of your fire are not permitted to cross the boundary. In other words, if I'm if there's a guy in 4-8 sitting over here, he's not allowed to shoot into the 377 sector. And that's because he doesn't know what's going on there. And you want to avoid fratricide. And the right boundary is where it's at because of the high terrain. All right. But even so, it's like, 5 kilometers or more wide, which is plenty of space for a battalion to maneuver. It's not unrealistic. We have an objective up here, and that's really kind of a limited advance. In other words, the mission is clear a lane out this far. And this kind of makes sense because it's at a road junction of a couple of major highways. It's well past where we know that the enemy's at, and that's how that works. So we're going to put 2 lanes in, and then we're going to do some assaulting. Now, this is the most complex kind of breach that there is, which is called an assault breach, which means once it's not just a matter of like poking a hole through a minefield and continuing. It's the fact that there's a complex defense there means that once you get inside and past the obstacle, you now have to continue to assault sideways, and we know we're going to hit more obstacles. And so it becomes kind of dynamic. You really can't plan everything, right? We can plan up to a certain point. Then after that, we've got to look and see, well, what's our effective combat power in one unit? What's left? Where do we got to go? And things like that. So generally speaking, we're gonna make a breach. Then from there, we're gonna go sideways, and then somebody's going to go forward to the limit of advance. And let's see, what I was going to say. One of the interesting things here is on going sideways, we absolutely don't know who's going to do that, right? We can expect we're going to take casualties going through here because people are going to want to shoot at them. Now, we're going to do stuff to try and minimize that, but we don't, there's no way to predict. I can't say, well, okay, Alpha Company's going to be at 80% strength when they get through that. Just can't do that, right? And so there is a degree of, you got to go so far and then assess and react, which is, that's fun, right? That's fun when you play a game like this. That's fine. Okay, so now we have a good feel for the tasks, right? We know we need to make a couple of reaches. And the guys that do that are either engineers or infantry. I'd like to make 2 breaches. I can live with 1. For each breach, it's probably a good idea to have redundancy at that point. And so I'm going to organize my forces so that I have 2 breachers per lane. And I've got the assets to do that, right? So I've got, and let me drag guys back around over here. So this is my TO&E. So I've got 3 mech platoons and I've got 2 engineer platoons. Any of those can breach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign basically the engineer company is going to breach. I think I'll have them breach this place, and I'm going to use some of these guys to breach over here. So what that drives me to, instead of taking my mechanized platoons and spreading them as far across as I can, I need to keep one company with 2 mech platoons. And so what I'll do is I will take, oh, we'll keep the platoon numbers the same. I'll take 3rd platoon of Charlie Company and put it in Alpha Tank, and I'll do that. So now what I got to do is actually make that happen in the OB. And what I'll do is let me zoom in so I can read who's who. Okay, so that's 3rd platoon. Charlie Company is going to Alpha Tank. And I will change the OB.
As long as you do this during the deployment phase, if you will, prior to start, it doesn't incur any logistical timing of that reorganization.
No,
But
no, anything you do here, including orders, there's no penalties.
Okay.
So like whatever orders you give at this point, as soon as you hit go, they're going to start executing. There's no delays whatsoever.
But if you tried to reorg mid scenario, it would incur some timing issues, correct?
Well, no, I don't think the game engine does that. It's a matter of the orders you give.
Okay.
After the game starts, those things have got delays. The thing you got to worry about is if you resubordinate folks during the game, is you got to pay attention to command range. So, if you say like, I'm going to cut this platoon to that company and he's like 10 kilometers away, that.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
That will slow down. That will slow down getting that guy over to where his new company is.
I'm just wondering if you've been decimated a bit in one unit, and you want to just reorg them into another.
That's well. I mean, there's another aspect to that is when a headquarters is destroyed, there is a reorganization that happens, under computer control.
Okay.
And that has bad effects.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. We need to move 3rd platoon Alpha Tank down to Charlie Company. And then just to make things look pretty, we'll resequence things inside the OB. That one's okay. And we're going to move this guy up. Okay. So now I've got guys pretty much organized the way I want them to be. So now I'm gonna start deploying them. And let's zoom this out. Take the brigade headquarters and throw him in the back somewhere in Bamberg. All right. So my breaching elements are this company and the engineer company. And I am going to be breaching, along the northwest. So I'm going to stack guys up over in here. And I love me some infantry, so I'm going to put those guys in front. All right. And then they got a tank platoon. We'll put the tank platoon and the fire support vehicle kind of towards the back. Headquarters behind them. And then we're going to stack up the engineers up with them. Stick their headquarters in the back. Okay, so there's my breach guys. They're set. Okay, so now the next thing is I need to have security and suppression forces. Okay, so what is that? What does that mean? What I want to have are some direct fire guys that could cover places that could shoot at my breachers. Okay, and so when I look, okay, actually, let me back up. Let me back up a minute. Okay, let's look at the terrain. All right, so I'm gonna breach in this valley over here, and there is along in here a contour line that divides the sector in half, and there is a defensive position, probably a company, sitting here. And I can, if I maneuver my guys right, I can effectively take this unit off the board, make them irrelevant. Because unless they move, they can't see what's going to happen over here. They have to move from here and get over along this edge over here somewhere. All right. And that's kind of like, kind of like getting to the core of attrition versus maneuver warfare, right? You use the geometry of things to make enemy forces irrelevant, which means they might as well not even be on the battlefield because they can't contribute. And if they are going to contribute, they got to move. And if they're going to move, I know where they got to move to. So then that means I can put guys to whack them when they move. So I'm going to pay attention to that, and I want to put people in position that if they leave their defensive position and try to get to some place where they can influence what happens at the breach site, that they're vulnerable. They will be out of their defensive position. They'll be out of good terrain. They're going to have to go out into the open without defensive holes. Okay. So that pretty much tells me that now if I put them over in here, that will accomplish that. And if they don't move, that's fine. We can police them up after, we get the breach in and we get the lanes and we clear this, we clear the corridor for the follow-on forces. Then later on, okay, fine, we'll go hunt down all the stragglers and police them up. But the main thing is, while we're executing all these blue arrows, I don't want those guys participating. And if they try, I want to inflict a bunch of casualties and discourage them. So I'm going to go ahead and take a tank company and do that with them. Let me drag these artillery guys out of the way. Now, right now, I'm not going to worry about like giving orders to anybody. I'm just going to get the geometry set. Okay, so the next thing is, what happens then? After we get these breaches in, what do I want to do? Well, I got to do these arrows. Now, this arrow here is most likely somebody surviving getting through the breach. I expect to have combat power to get through the mines and then do an assault. And there's two places I got to assault. I got to assault this defensive position and I got to assault this one. And actually, there's two here. And what I don't know is what's in there, right? Those are both good locations. And it may be motorized rifle company. It may be the battalion anti-armor platoon. It may be the regimental anti-armor platoon. It may be a motorized rifle company and a tank company. I don't know, right? I do know that those two places are important, and I'm going to have to deal with them. And at least initially, some of the breach forces are going to handle those two things. That's their task. Is it's not like, well, once you make a hole in a minefield, you're done. You're not, right? You make a hole in a minefield, then you assault somebody. Then after that, we gotta assess and see where what's going on, and then react to that. Um, the other thing to think about is, if you're smart, somewhere back in here, there's probably some sort of reserve to react to whatever the attack is. So I'm not expecting all of the combat power of the battalion to be up front. There's going to be something back here somewhere. Don't know where. Somewhere back here, there's going to be some sort of reserve. Might be a motorized rifle company, might be the tank company. Don't know. Okay, so at some point though, I need to push more combat power through the breach and drive to the limit of advance. Okay. And I also know that I may not be able to clear the trenches with the guys that do the breach. So that means that this company, which has some infantry, is probably a reinforcement to clearing the initial defense, and that this tank company is probably the guys I want to send deep. Okay, so let's get folks staged to do those tasks. And so we'll stack up a company here. And then we'll just stack up a tank company, kind of an exploitation force, I guess you could call it, here. Okay, I think that's the battalion headquarters. Yeah, so just stick the battalion headquarters back in here. Okay, so I've got my maneuver guys situated. The next thing is let's look at fire support. So, like, how far can the mortars shoot? Not that far. We need to push them forward as much as we can to give them coverage. So we'll do that. And then the artillery batteries, they can cover the whole map, so it doesn't really matter where I put them. Just get them back away from any possibility of being observed. Put them on roads so that if I do want to push them around for some reason, they're easy to do. The last thing is the reconnaissance. So what do I do with the reconnaissance in an attack like this? Right? I don't really need to worry about watching my flanks. I've got friendly units to the left and right. I don't really need, given that this is kind of a crawl scenario, I really don't need to try and find stuff for my initial attack. What I really would like to know though is if there's a reserve in the enemy rear, is it being committed somewhere? Is it moving? And what is it? So what I want to do is I want to try and get them where they can see stuff back in this area. All right. So how could I do that? Well, obviously I'm not going to drive them to the minefield. But and this is tricky because it's rough terrain. Can I get them deep enough going along the eastern part of the sector to where by the time I need to know stuff, they can see back in here? The other thing is that when we start the game, I'm going to turn off this overlay, and then we can see what is confirmed by units on the ground. So I'm gonna set those guys up to do that. So we'll put the scout platoon up here, and basically I'm gonna run them down along the eastern sector boundary of the battalion, with them looking basically to the west at several points, right? If I can get a guy here, okay, let's do line of sight checks, right? So if I get a guy say here, what does he see? Well, he sees a lot. And if I can get a guy here, what does he see? He sees a lot. And if I get a guy here, what does he see? He sees just behind the main defense. So those are good places to put people. It's just I can't put them there. I got to drive them there. So we're going to do that. And we'll do move deliberate. And let's see. I guess we'll go here, 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 here. Get them to there. And put them in hold. Let's take a look at that. Actually, before I do that, let me check SOPs. I know this is kind of a sore spot with a lot of folks. What I do is I go to the high headquarters and I set the default SOP for like everybody. And then I'll go into, and basically it's go into your indirect fire units and go into your scouts, change those. And that gives you a pretty good fit. It's a pretty efficient workflow. And so we want the scope to be default for it, new orders. And what I want is, because I'm going to have guys doing very dangerous things like clearing mines and while being shot at, I don't want them quitting. So I want to set their losses to do or die and their standoff to 0. I'll give them maximum range for fires, and they never relocate, and prefer during movement to go through concealment. And when they hit minefields, I want them to stop and reduce, because I've got my main task here is to make a lane for other units. And the in stride thing is about just the unit going through the minefield. If it's a stop and reduce, and it makes the mines go away for everybody. That's what I want to have happen. For now, for these, we'll have disembark at where they stop. And I think that'll do it. So then we apply this to this and later unit orders. So now the entire force is set to that SOP. And then I will change that for selected units. For example, I will change it for the scouts. And for the scouts, I want them to sneak up to the enemy, so I'll put their standoff at 0. I don't want them shooting. I don't want them initiating firefights, right?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you did the brigade level SOP, wouldn't you have used apply to self and all subordinates? Because what I'm noticing here is that like the acceptable losses didn't.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I messed that up.
Okay, sorry. Okay, good. See, I know the game a little bit. Right?
No. Yeah, it's complicated. Okay, so relocate when never. I don't care about minefields because they shouldn't be doing minefields. What I do want them to do is hide their vehicles. It reduces their spotting signature. And then we'll do that to himself and all subordinate units. And actually, I should have done this. I should have done SOP for new units, for new orders. So I got to do it again.
That helps me a lot there because I've always been a little bit confused by that scope. So you can actually give each order a scope. That's
Yes,
powerful. I didn't even
yes,
realize that.
yes. And if you look at a dashboard, like when a unit has got a movement order and it's got a bunch of waypoints, you can change that SOP per waypoint.
Yeah. Okay. It makes sense, but I don't think I ever use it too much. I always use that.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that. Okay. Actually, now I got to go back and do this one. I got to fix this one. Okay, so now I got to go back and fix the scouts. Okay, I have to pause for a bio break for like about 2 minutes.
Yeah, go for it.
You can edit that out later.
Mm-hmm.
All right, back in a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so we're pretty close to starting to get ready to give orders, right? And so that kind of means that we have to go back to our procedure of gap crossing and our acronym of SOSRA, right? So, the first S in SOSRA is suppression. And that's an interesting topic. And it's a hot topic. In fact, it's something as a team, we're going to talk at great length about tomorrow morning. Because if you look back at the professional writings, like going back 50 years, it is a very ill-defined topic, and there's not a unified field theory of suppression. And that goes back to like like Napoleonic and Civil War time. You know, and let me throw this out to you, Pete. What do you think suppression is?
Um, uh, Taking away the offensive power of the other, right, of the enemy.
Okay, that and in my personal view, that's you're on the right azimuth. You're probably further longer range than I am, and I would say it is degrading the performance of a target unit. And the thing is, degrade the performance. Well, what does that mean? Right? There's a big spectrum there, right? And there's different ways to achieve that. If you say, well, I want to degrade the firepower. So how do you do that? Well, one thing is you can kill some of the other guys, right? Another thing is you can make them hide. Another thing is you can throw dirt in their face and they can't see the targets. Another thing is you can mess with their comms and they can't call fire support. So there's, it's complicated, you know, uh, and we're not anywhere near in the game here, any sort of unified field theory on that. However, we do know that, and the game implements that if you get shot at, right, your readiness drops, and your readiness is a critical input into lots of calculations about, can you see targets? Can you see units? Can you hit them? Can you kill them? Right. So that's part of it. And of course, if you kill, subunits in an enemy unit, you're degrading their firepower because they got less weapons to shoot. All right. So we can go at it from there at this point. So given that the first thing to do is to suppress, the first thing we should do is take whatever actions are available right here and now to suppress the enemy. So what is that? Well, given that this is a crawl scenario, we know there are enemy defensive positions in these locations. This last one, we've already decided that we're going to maneuver to make it ineffective. We're going to take it off the board. That brings us down to 3 places that we expect there to be enemy units. Note that you can't use artillery to blast holes in minefields. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to shoot artillery. We're going to shoot a preparatory fire at these 3 positions while we move people forward. Okay, so now let's talk about the sequence of events of moving people forward, right? The next thing is in SOSRA is we're going to obscure. Okay, fine, we're going to fire some smoke. Then the next thing is we're going to secure. The secure part is we're going to position units so that they can proactively protect our breaching element. Okay, and we've already identified that some good locations for our security element is along in this edge of this wood line, because the elevation and a line of sight lets these guys see anybody who gets sporty in these locations. And the suppression not only covers the movement of the suppression and obscuration provides protection to the breaching force as they move out into the open to do their breach, but it also provides protection for the supporting and security forces as they take up their positions to do their job. All right, so that's the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fire a prep. And we're just going to dump a couple of 155-minute. Well, I don't think 3. 2 will do it. We'll cancel that just to make it easier rather than trying to delete it inside the dashboard. Okay, so we're gonna dump 2 missions on each one of those things. And then the next thing is to think about, like, how much time is it going to take to move guys forward? And this is kind of like you need to play things for a while to understand the time and space involved. I can't give you a cheat sheet, right? And I will say that, well, our current command cycle is about 22 minutes. And I would say it'll probably take about 20 minutes to get the tankers over here in position up in here. Okay, so I want to have fires that cover about 20 minutes. And I'm going to do things at a slower pace here. Again, this being a crawl thing. I'm going to move in one command cycle. I'm going to move my supporting guys, my security guys forward, fire a prep, and get my scouts moving to because they got a long way to go, and I got to sneak them back in there. So I'm gonna get the scouts moving, but I'm not going to move the breaching guys out on the first order. I'm going to move them on the second order. I want I want a good prep on the defensive positions, and I want to make sure that my security guys are in position before I bring forward the breachers out of their covered position. Now, once you play this enough and you get a feel for time and space and movement rates and whatnot, then you might say, well, I could actually move, I could give orders to my breaching guys and just have them wait 15 minutes before they move out, right? And there's risk there. Like things don't go right, maybe they're out too soon. And so, I'd recommend it when you first start out doing this stuff, just go ahead and do it like, um, set of elements in one order, next set of elements in the next order until you get comfortable with looking at the terrain and whatnot to understand the time and space of moving guys around. Okay, so we got one mission in. Let's get another mission in. Guess what kind of barrage it is. Okay, once you commit it, you'll see that you can set like your round count, right? And we're going to play around with this later on when it comes to synchronizing smoke, because I tend to like to fire multiple rounds of a battery, like a battery 3 or a battery 5 or whatever, and then run it to the minimum amount of time. Mostly because you get a better target effect with that, and that's kind of the way you do it in real life. The other thing is, I have 3 there. I don't want to do that. Cancel that one. Reorder it. If you mess up an order, just give a new order. I should probably desensitize my click pad here or something. So I'm going to fire 60 rounds, and it's going to take 8 minutes. The biggest thing is the first set of rounds for a mission has a higher kill rate because you're kind of catching guys out in the open. I don't know. I have to talk to William. I don't know that if you do back-to-back missions, if that resets, or if there's an interval where they keep their heads down or not.
So without getting into too much, I don't want to push out the rails too much, but like in reality, how would up to this point, how would this have been logistically triggered, right? In reality, would there be primarily radio calls for different points or phases of the operation, or would it have been purely done by time? Would for example, any like the engineering units have been told, I want you to breach at what the specific time, or just how does this
it'll be like an on you'd be told on order. You'd be told
okay.
what we're going to do. We're going to fire prep. It's going to last so long, and then you'll be told to move forward. On order, move forward, right?
Okay.
And at the battalion command level, you would make a thing called a decision support matrix or a decision support template, where you know what you're going to do, and at certain points you identify where you have to make a decision, and hopefully it's like I'm going to either do A, B, or C, right? And here's the conditions for A, B, or C. So like as much decision making that you can do before the battle, you figure it out, and you just got to look at your cheat sheet and go, okay, yeah, we're going to do B, right? Doesn't happen until the commander says to do B, but the thought's been put into it. You're not trying to figure out
Right.
what to do at that point during the battle. So for something like this, you'd go like, our expected schedule is this, right? We're going to fire a prep and it's going to last this long. And then when the prep's done, then we're going to fire smoke. And then when the smoke builds, we're going to tell you to go. You don't go till somebody tells you to go,
Right.
right? But you know what the plan is, and you can watch it unfold and be ready so that when you get told to go, you're ready to go because you've seen the conditions have been laid for you to go. Now,
Right.
it's when there's a deviation that you got to react to it,
Right.
right? Okay, and I think I'm working on this one.
And excuse the 20 questions on that, but
No, 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 that's okay.
I don't know why I have a weird interest in the command and control aspect of it.
It's not a logistic. It like you said, it's a C2 thing. It's not logistics.
Right. Logistics got you what you want where you want it, and now you have to command and control it.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Look at you. Cut you down to 4 minutes. Now, what I could do at this point, for example, is I know I'm going to fire these batteries for 8 minutes, and there's 5 minutes in between each mission, right? So they're going to fire 4 minutes, and then 5 minutes goes by. They're going to fire another 4 minutes, and so that's at like minute 14 they're available to do other things, right? And I could start throwing smoke down, except I'm not going to give orders to the breach guys to move out yet. Now, if I wanted to compress that, then I would think in terms of that, like, okay, so now I want to throw smoke out there. And then that mission has to execute, and that's like another 6 minutes before they start shooting. Another 3 or 4 minutes to fire the rounds, and the smoke builds up. And then I could say, okay, so I'm gonna give an order for the breach guys, and I'm gonna delay it based on how much time it takes to fire all the two HE prep missions and then the smoke mission. But I'm not gonna do that. What I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna hold the breach guys in place, fire the prep, move my support guys up, get my scouts launched out, and then take a look at the next orders phase. But when you get to the walk phase or the run phase, you want to think in terms of how do I compress the timeline from doing each segment of the procedure on a different command cycle. I want to try to compress those in where they start to overlap. I'm doing bits and pieces in the same command cycle. It's more complicated, so you got to get comfortable just like moving all the different moving pieces around and understand time and space and movement rates and all that kind of stuff first. Okay, so now let's work on uh, our support guys here, our security guys. That's headquarters. Whoa. Headquarters moving? No, you're not supposed to be moving. Oh, that's scouts. That's why. Okay. Let me get this thing out of the way so I can see what I'm looking at. I think I want in this stack, I got another platoon. Yeah. I want to take the Fist V for this company, and I am going to move him up to a vantage point where he can see lots of stuff. Okay, so now I think I've got all these guys. I got the scouts. No, I've only got one scout moved. That guy's going there. So we got to move the other scouts. I want them to go deeper. Now, let me give a pro tip here. All right, so like your end movement posture, hold versus screen. Right, screen's kind of a misleading thing. Screen is the posture you would be in if you were doing a screen activity. It's not a screen mission. So what does that mean? It's really more of a temporary halt. So vehicles kind of disperse a little bit. They're not in a fighting posture as far as figuring out sectors of fire and whatnot. And any dismounted troops with the unit are just doing local security on the vehicle.
They're
The
not doing
advantage
a
is
deployment,
see.
right? Is that the difference?
I'm sorry.
Is the difference that they're not going to be deploying? Is that
Yeah,
is that the way to think about it? Okay.
that's a big. I mean, it's not just the soldiers aren't deploying, the vehicles aren't deploying. It's what you want to think about it is it's a temporary halt, right? Think of it as that, and it is the lowest. It is the state where you can transition to something else the fastest, right? So if you're going to move guys and you want to move them up to here and then stop and see what you're going to do next, put them in screen. Just be aware that it's not a fighting stance, so they should be in protective terrain, screened from enemy observation and whatnot. And if they are, then that's good. If you say go to hold, well, it takes like 30 minutes to actually get in to the hold posture, which is you're deployed, vehicles are deployed, troops are deployed, you've got sectors of fire laid out, yada yada yada. And there's advantages to doing that, right? When you're fighting, you can see more enemy platforms when you're in a hold as opposed to a screen. But um, the tip here is don't read too much into the word screen. Think of it as a temporary halt that allows you a lot of flexibility to keep moving or do something different.
But I'm assuming it lessens your ability to withstand an assault.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're more vulnerable to direct fire and indirect fire. And you don't find targets as easily. At the unit level, it's about the same. But when you're talking about can this tank see that tank? Well, not it's not as good as if they're in hold. Okay, let's get this guy, get the scout some orders. Let's see if we can get him over to here with it. Oh, let's see what we can do with this. And no, well, I don't like that. How's that look? That looks good. Okay. All right. I think we're ready to go ahead and start fighting. Might be wrong. We'll find out. Here we go. Well, I didn't mean to do that. I got the sound effects on. I'll turn those off at the end of the. Actually,
It's not too loud. It's coming in okay. It's not overbearing. It might be coming in your ear more than it is on the videos, but yeah, I'm not hearing it too bad.
Okay, user prefs. Now, first, I want to speed up the turn resolution, and we'll turn off all this crap. A lot of times when I play the game, actually, I hit start and go do something else. Come back later. Okay, that's what I like. Okay, and we'll pick up from there. Okay, so we got our prep going in first, and we're going to hit all these known locations because it's the walk mode, and we're getting some BDA, battle damage assessment. So you get the animation of the impact, and then if you get secondaries, then that means you killed something. Don't know what. You get a signature, right? You hit vehicles and they start burning and making huge columns of smoke that go up 100 200 meters. Our security forces are moving forward. Scouts have started moving, but mostly we're just beating up on the poor souls that are in their fighting positions. So the casualty rate is highest when the artillery first hits. Then it drops off quite a bit. It just kind of depends on terrain and what kind of munitions and what kind of target. It is very hard to totally kill a unit with artillery. It's like that last one or two subunits takes an inordinate amount of ammo to knock out. But the whole time that the stuff is falling on their pointed little heads, their readiness is dropping, which is going to decrease the effectiveness of their fire. And their ability to spot targets too. Okay, so we got 2 platoons in position. Nobody's been shot at yet. We've got a scout that's like way out where he shouldn't be, and he just got shot at. And we got a company, motorized rifle company, in that easternmost position. Okay. And we'll shoot at him back.
So as you were hinting at, the readiness does directly affect, if you will, the timing of offensive fire, correct, and defensive fire and Overwatch fire.
Not the timing, but the effectiveness.
Okay.
So, we've got several soft factors: morale, training, and readiness are the big ones. The most important one is the training level. The next most important is readiness, and readiness floats up and down. So every unit recovers readiness at a particular rate. Um, and 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 so the main currently the main suppression effect is whenever you shoot at a unit, whether it's direct fire or indirect fire, there's a readiness decrement to the target unit, and that readiness then affects the rate at which the success rate at which a unit can spot enemy units. And then if it spots an enemy unit and decides to engage, it affects the ability or the rate at which the subunits, the individual tanks and squads and whatnot, can spot enemy tanks and squads and whatnot. Because it's not a matter of, well, okay, if this U.S. unit spots that Warsaw Pet unit, it sees everything in a unit. It doesn't work that way. It's we go through and and we look at the training level and the readiness and morale, and we roll some dice and go, okay, you can see this unit, this tank, this APC, that squad, and that machine gun. That's what you see. All right. And then from there we go to figure out, like, from a behavioral standpoint, what would that kind of unit shoot at of what it sees.
Is there any stacking effect to readiness?
No.
Okay. That's what. Okay.
The primary stacking effect is there's a limit on how much stuff you can jam into a hex, right? And if you try and jam too much stuff in it, and you'll see this if you have a lot of folks you're trying to, like, run through a bottleneck, you'll see traffic jams, and you'll see, little pop-ups that go, oh, I'm waiting on those guys, or, like, traffic problem, gotta wait, and you gotta wait for people to drive through and get through the bottleneck.
Yeah, I think I was getting at there was that whether or not, like, let's say you had a unit that's really low in readiness and a steady unit is comes into the same hex. I just didn't know if it kind of helped the readiness of the other
No,
unit.
no,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
It's all bounded inside that unit, right? And I mean, and that's a real thing. It's like, your platoon's in good shape, and you're organized, and you know what you got to do, and you're doing it, and you go through somebody else who's disorganized for whatever reason, but they're disorganized. The fact that you're there doesn't help them, right? Um, you got your job and you're doing your job, and and I think what you're kind of getting to is, like, how does leadership work as far as reorganizing people, and we don't model that at this point. Um, and so a unit helping another unit doesn't occur. No. Okay, so we're 22 minutes into the battle. We have fired our prep, and our support forces are in good shape, except this guy looks like he needs ammo, because I wasn't careful about moving scouts, and I think I may have even lost a scout unit, and somebody over here shot. No, I got all my scout guys are all there. This guy's taking 50% casualties. This motorized rifle company shot, and in response, it looks like one of the artillery batteries shot improved conventional munitions at him. This yellow hex here, what that represents is unexploded ordnance from ICM. Back then, the dud rate was the real dud rate was like pretty close, pushing 10%. sometimes. I think by contract it was supposed to be 5%, but it wasn't. It was higher than that, and it was high enough that in Desert Storm, uh, coalition commanders would not move their units through areas that got ICM shot at because the dud rate was too high. Now, is that because the terrain was different and a lot of sand caused a high dud rate? Is it because manufacturing? I don't know, right? What I do know is that there was a high dud rate, and it caused um, a moratorium on ICM in the U.S. Army until the contractors fixed the dud rate and got it down to like 2%. Then they said, okay, we'll use ICM again. And what we're talking about here is bomblets that didn't detonate when they hit the ground. And of course, if you drive a vehicle over one of those things, it at a minimum will cause a mobility kill. And in Desert Storm, battalion commanders are like, it's not worth the risk. I'll go around it. All right. So now let's see what we're going to do next. Those guys are in position. We got scouts scouts are getting in position. Actually, what I want to do is I want to get my scouts one where they can watch this area. No, not in the valley. They can't see the valley, but at least they can watch this upper area. I want to get scouts where they can watch this and spot if there is a reserve moving from the enemy rear forward. And if it is moving forward, where's it going to? Right. The next thing is I want to get eyes in the vicinity of our objective or our limit of advance. Is there anybody back there? So I'm going to leave this guy here because he can watch, and you can see these numbers are kind of like the relative ability to look in there in those hexes. And if you see a number that's probably like above 30, you got a decent chance of seeing somebody moving through there, right? And so I can see all back here behind the defensive belt, anybody moving up. This guy doesn't see too much. He's not in a good position. And this guy too. And those are the guys that I want to move into better places to observe things, right? So what I probably want to do is let me go back to the line of sight. So if you shift click a location, you can see what it looks like there. So probably what I want to do is take this guy and move him up to here, and then take this guy and I don't know, maybe I want to move him to here. What can he see? Yeah, he can see the objective pretty good. Do I want to go this far? That's a long ways. Not that much better. So yeah, I'll probably move him to here. That's good. And so what I'm doing is I'm using my scouts to get a read on the enemy rear. And you know what? Maybe they find stuff and shoot artillery, call artillery missions on it. If not, the biggest thing is I want them to tell me if there is somebody in the enemy rear moving forward, and if they're moving forward, where are they moving to? That's what I'm looking for. And even if they say there's nobody moving, that's important as well. And I'm putting them in hold because that gives you a spotting bonus to finding enemy units. Because it goes back to you're going to deploy. We've got sectors, people looking in the right places, and all that kind of coordination stuff. Okay, so I got scouts going to where I want them to go to. Now it's time to crank up the breachers. Okay, so what I'm going to do, because I want to synchronize smoke with the breachers, right? I want to move the breachers first, and then I'm going to look at the dashboard, look at the waypoints, and see how much time it takes to get to. And it's estimated time, but I have a feel for like when are they going to get to different places on the battlefield, and then I can look at, given that it's going to take 6 minutes for the first smoke round to hit. I have an idea of when and where the smoke can be, right? And then I will probably I may go back in and put some delays in the breachers moving forward, like wait 5 minutes, then move. That gives time for the smoke to land and start build up. So just to be sure, I'm going to really eyeball each individual unit's SOP for future orders to make sure that they're do or die, 0 hexes, max range, relocate never. Yep. Concealment. The big thing here is stop and reduce. All right. And our choices for minefields is, I don't care, just drive through it. In stride breach, which means that sister units can go through it, or stop and reduce, which means that it removes the minefield effect from the map for everybody. And that's what their mission is here, is stop and reduce. The whole point here is that this battalion is making breaches that can be used by all the U.S. forces. And so I'm going to take the infantry guys have them breach this one. And then once they breach that, continue and breach the boundary obstacle between the two companies here in the northeast. I'm sorry, northwest. And I'm using 2 platoons to do that for redundancy, because there's a risk that you send a platoon to breach and they get vaporized before they finish the breach. And if they do that, it's not like somebody can come in and take over where they left off. You got to start over, right? And I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I get a breach in that hex. Now, when we talk about these breaches, how many breaches do you need? Well, a battalion needs 2 lanes. We want to pass a brigade level unit through here. So that means 4 lanes. So that's 2 hexes. That's 1,000 meters worth of width. And that's why I'm doing this as 2 hexes. And again, I'm doubling up per hex to make sure, hopefully, that I get a lane in each, I get lanes in each hex. And that's kind of trying to replicate, how we used to do it on the ground. Yeah, sorry. Didn't click a different hex. And this is an assault breach, which means that first I got to get through the minefield, and then I got to poke holes in between the defending company's obstacles, so that then I can do flank attacks on the companies. And I'm expecting to expend, doing those 2 breaches, the breach force. Now, it may turn out that I have guys left over. I don't know. But I'm not counting on that, right? I'm counting on the combat power that is in these two platoons, these two mech platoons, and these two engineer platoons will likely be expended getting through these minefields and to the next thing. Now, what I'm going to do with the engineers, I'd kind of like to save them because they've got other capabilities. Not that I'm going to use them in this scenario, but my professional experience says I want to preserve those guys. So I'm not going to use them um, to make a path to the next company over. But there are, they are very studly infantry guys. They've got anti-armor weapons, they've got machine guns, and they know how to use them. So I will use them on this company here, which, as I recall, I saw quite a few casualty balloons happen during the prep. I should probably have checked those guys' SOP, but I think they're okay. Yep, they're stop and reduce, do or die, never relocate, concealment. Yep. Okay, those guys are good. Everybody's good. All right, and we'll get the other engineer platoon and send them forward. So again, this is a crawl. So what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of like bounding guys forward to their next thing. I'm not trying to stack actions up in one single order. When you get to the walk phase, then you would say, well, once you get done breaching through here, maybe I order you to assault. But for now, let's just focus on getting each discrete phase done. Okay, so now what we got left back here? Well, we got the artillery guy, the forward observer, and we're going to go ahead and just move him up to where he can see something and call for fires. And then we got a tank platoon in the mech company, and we're going to move him up to where he can contribute at least machine gun fires, maybe. And I'm not going to move the other companies yet because there's no breach for them to drive through. If I move, I've got a company back here, I got a company back here. They're going to move through these breaches, but the breaches aren't there yet. I move them now, then they're going to come up here and park and wait for the breaches to happen, and they're going to park out in the middle of the open. So we're going to leave them back in the back. The next thing is now what we can do is we can have a look at, like, at what point do they get to waypoint, this lead platoon, when do they get to waypoint 4? All right. And around 8:42. And what time is it now? It is 8:20. So 20 minutes is when they're going to get to the minefield. And part of that is I'm calling them and giving them an order, and there's a delay to get their stuff together and get moving, get organized, move down there and start doing their thing. It's going to take, what is it, 20 minutes? 42, 20, yeah, it's going to take 20 minutes. All right. So they're not going to be in position at the breach for 20 minutes. When do they get exposed? Probably here, right? There's guys here, there's guys there. Can they see that far? Yeah, probably. What time do they get there? They get there they get here at 8:39. So probably 10, 15 minutes. All right. Once they get moving, it's fast. So I probably want to have smoke landing out in this valley in about 10 minutes and then keep it going for like another 20 minutes at least. I don't want to have it falling immediately because they're going to be sitting there gathering their things, getting in their vehicle, looking at the route, talking it over. Okay, here you're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then they'll move out. And throwing the smoke out early is just going to waste ammo. So I want to have the smoke land. I'm going to say at 8:32, 10 minutes. Okay, this guy's already shooting something. He's shooting at that guy. I don't care about him. He's shooting at this at these guys. Going way back to the beginning, we've taken them by the scheme of maneuver. We've taken those guys off the board. They don't matter. So I'm going to cancel that mission. And the mortars have not fired anything yet. And we're going to have them dump a bunch of smoke. Now, the thing is, when you shoot your artillery missions, there's a delay between missions. All right. You fire a mission, then you gotta move your gun. You gotta lay it for the new mission. You gotta get your charges right. You gotta get the right ammo, the right fuse, get all that stuff together, and then you can shoot it. And so it's the delay between missions depends upon the nation. For the US and for the UK, and actually I think for everybody in NATO, it's 5 minutes. And then you have to add another minute to that for just getting the fire mission down to the firing unit. So it's you fire one mission, 6 minutes later you can fire another mission. That's what we're dealing with. And so if you want to fill an area, you can't do it like promptly with one unit. And even when you're moving, you probably need more than one firing unit to fill it fast enough to cover the movement. Because once a unit starts moving in vehicles, they move pretty quick. There's a delay before they get moving, and once they start moving, it's like 1 hex a minute. Okay, so what we're going to need to do to cover this stuff is we're going to need to use all 4 of our indirect fire units and think about when do they start, the amount of interval in between, where are they going to end up at, and it's a little bit of math there, right? But it's a synchronization thing, and you can do it in the game. It takes a little bit of work, but you can do it, and we're going to do it here. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shoot the mortars. And we're going to shoot smoke. And we're going to fire several missions. The first mission we're going to fire is here. And then we'll fire a mission here. And then we'll fire a mission there. All right, so we're going to cover like the first place that people get exposed and then each of the breach lanes. Now we got to figure out the timing. All right, so actually, first thing we got to do is figure out how many rounds we're going to shoot. Now, what you want to do is fire at least 10 rounds in a hex for effective smoke. Okay. And the first thing to look at is, are they passing through it or are they going to sit there? Well, if they're going to pass through it, I only need that 10 round increment. If they're going to be sitting there for a while, then I kind of like need, 10 rounds, then like 5 rounds or so a minute to keep it built up. In this case, this is just a pass-through place. So we can go with 10 rounds. Now, when we get up here and we're on the breach, we probably want 20 rounds. and this is not Battlefield calculus. This is like my experience game wise and real world wise. All right. So now the next thing is, what time do we want this thing to show up? Right. And if we go ASAP, it's going to show up at 8:27. Well, we want it at 8:32. So we want to add 5 minutes to it. And closest we can get to is I'll go 8:31. All right. And then the rest of them are offset beyond that. And that's fine. Okay, so then that takes care of that one. So now let's go to this artillery unit, and we're going to cancel his mission and give him a new barrage of smoke. And we're going to have him shoot one there. And then we're going to go backwards so that the time that the mortars shoot smoke into this hex is the time that this artillery unit shoots smoke into that hex. Then that way we will basically have the two hexes on the road at the same time, and then we'll have the two breach locations smoked at the same time. And again, we'll go. Why is it saying ICM? I must have clicked the wrong thing. Okay. So we want this guy, we want 10 rounds because it's a pass-through hex. And the duration, we can do it for like 2 minutes. And the start time will be, we'll do 8:31 as well. And then the other ones will leave default. Okay. Next battery. So we're going to be breaching here and here. Anybody in here at the same level has line of sight to those breach hexes. So it's probably a good idea to smoke these two hexes. Problematic for these guys is that they're at a higher elevation, and putting smoke here, there's a good chance they can look over it. That's kind of a waste. So we're gonna do another battery smoking here. And we'll go here first and then there. And then we'll have those guys start at, we'll have them start at 8:33. Okay, so we've got, let's see, 2 howitzer batteries and the mortars shooting smoke. These guys do not get to go make some coffee. They get to do a fire mission. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit these 3. The guys that have visibility on the breach. And we will make the missions as short as possible so that we shift from one target to the other and get fire on all the targets as fast as possible. We'll put 120 rounds on them. Okay. Now let's take a look around. I think we are now ready to go to the next phase. Here we go. Okay, second prep going in. Oh, we killed somebody. Good. Bad guys are shooting at us with indirect fire. And the bad guys know that that platoon is there because they shot from there. Well, that's not good. Somebody's shooting mortars at the scouts up there. One thing to think about too, it's kind of cruel, but smoke's going in. So there are several targets that are drawing indirect fire from the Soviets. Kind of a good thing for the breach force because it is taking indirect fire stress off of them. The Warsaw Pact is guys are already focused on the least dangerous part of our force to them. The most dangerous part right now is the breach force, and it's the most vulnerable part. Partly because they're going to be in the open, partly because they're not in very heavily armored vehicles.
Does the AI take into consideration the laying of smoke as preparatory in nature and react?
What do you mean?
Just kind of it is suppressive in nature. So the logic is that you may be preparing for a breach in that zone. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean that's yeah. I get what you're coming from. The thing is, and this is what kind of what makes it really hard is that there's different ways to use smoke. One of them is just to simply partition the battlefield. So, like, I'm using terrain elevation changes to partition the battlefield and remove like a quarter of the combat power of the defender from the whole fight, essentially, unless he moves it right. You can do the same thing with smoke, right? You can lay smoke and you can't see across it, and if you can't see across it, you can't shoot across it. So you've it's kind of the same effect as if you had a ridge line. It's you know you it's temporary, but it's there and it has an immediate impact. So now that gets into like a lot of nuanced things that are really hard to put into an AI model.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What is the meaning of smoke hitting here, right? And you have to interpret that, right? You have to interpret that from the context of the battlefield, how much smoke, what's the pattern, all that kind of stuff, right? It's no, we don't do that. It's what that's hard. That's really hard. It'd be great to do that, but I don't know that you could.
I used it once in a multiplayer game against Jan, just to mess with him. Yeah. So.
And you know what? You do that. I mean, like you do that on the ground. Like you throw smoke someplace, and it can prompt a response, right? It's like nobody's going to shoot smoke unless they're going to do something over here, right? And so then, like, here goes the reserve coming out of their hidey holes, going in way the wrong place. Now, I didn't mean to change screens here. I'm walking around my house. Where'd my game go?
Uh-oh, did I make you flinch enough to hit the X? I don't think I did.
No,
It
hang
crashed.
on a second. It didn't crash. There's something going on here. I'll just have to like reload it and run the last turn. That's all. I've got it set up to say it's like for whatever reason, whenever if something makes me leave the screen, it like kills the game. I'm not sure what's going on with that. So you get to do some editing.
That's fine.
Okay, what's the latest thing I got here going on? Is it this one? It's got to be that one.
My next question is, would you like to split this up into two parts?
Yeah, maybe we should do that. It's getting kind of
Yeah.
late. Yeah, this is where we're at.
Okay, so you get
We'll do a few more turns. I gotta import my graphics again. I just want to give a complete like walkthrough, right?
right.
Hang on a second here. Okay, Control A, Control C. There we go. Okay. All right. Back in a second while this thing catches up. Okay, I'm back. What happened? Where are we at?
You're still laying it
We
down.
got smoke coming in. Okay. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but after the initial orders, I haven't done a whole lot of clicking from turn to turn. Right. And I would posit that if when you're playing the game, you got to do a lot of clicking and issuing orders every turn, that, you know, um, it indicates a challenge up front that you have to overcome. Either you got surprised or, or your plan was just like fundamentally flawed and you got to react to it not working. And granted, this is early into this. I'm basically going through the motions of executing my plan. And I don't have to do a whole lot of ordering. It's just a matter of I know what I got to do and deciding when I'm going to do it, not figuring out what I'm going to do as the game unfolds, right? And that's kind of a professional way of looking at things. You really don't want to have to figure out what you're going to do in the middle of a battle. If you're doing that, you're very much in a huge positional disadvantage. And most of the time it's because something has happened that you are a victim of surprise. Either something showed up where you didn't think it was going to show up, or like you're the casualties you took doing something are way beyond what you estimated they were going to be, and you have you don't have the combat power that you expected to have at this place on the battlefield at this time in the battle. The other things, like are they coming this way or coming that way? There's things you can do, to be able to have time and space to respond to that. And if you don't have time, if you thought about that, but when it comes time to actually respond to it, and you don't have the time and space that you need to respond to it, well, that's because your plan's flawed. And there's a lot of techniques that the pros use to help work through that, right? And that's why, like when I play this game and I'm really trying to win something, I've got a couple of notepads, and I've got back in the day we called them cartoons. I've got sketches, right? And it's kind of interesting to listen to a corps commander talk to my division commander, and they're talking on the battlefield about hips and shoulders, for example. And there's, it's just a lot of work goes into trying to think through things, make notes, and anticipate and say, well, if this happens, we'll do that. If that happens, we'll do this. And you can do that playing this game, and it really helps. It really does. Okay, so where are we at? We got one mech platoon in a breach location. We've got the engineer company and another mech platoon almost to breaching. We're smoking. And oh, look, we found somebody. Who's this? I'm guessing that is, yeah, it's the MRB's mortar battery. High priority target. Okay. So 81 millimeter mortars, probably like 8 or 9 of them, and they're towed and they're being pulled by trucks, so they're not armored. Not a deal breaker if they survive, but it certainly would make things a bit easier if we could whack them. So let's whack them. Okay, so that guy's shooting there. We still got HE missions going. What? Okay, that guy's shooting smoke. He's done. The guys that need smoke are already past that. So he's going to get a mission to shoot these guys. Hopefully we can whack them before they leave. That they're mounted up and getting ready to leave. So hopefully we can hit them before they leave. So let's give them 30 rounds. How much we got left? We're almost out of HE. All right, it's worth it. They're going to have to reload after that. And other than that, the scouts are all where we want them to be. Okay, the support guys are where we want them to be. This guy's still resupplying? Really? And his readiness is low. His morale's crap.
Is that because it's set to 25%? Was that the default trigger? The
I'm
resupply?
sorry?
Was the resupply trigger 25% originally? Is that like the default?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's whatever the scenario designer makes. Okay. There's not like a game default. So when you build a scenario, you can go in there and say, these guys do this at that rate. Same thing with like, what's your engagement range or your tactical initiative and all those kinds of things.
And that's
That's
going to
set
be,
that's set by the scenario designer, but you can override it as a player. And
and that
and what I do is I go to the highest headquarters and I set my force the way I like to play it, and then by exception go to particular kinds of units and tweak that.
and then there's a time factor based on distance to the HQ of the
Yeah.
brigade. Yeah.
Well, to the higher headquarters, the next
Okay.
higher headquarters.
Okay.
So these guys got like they're full up on ammo. The main thing is that they're trying to recover readiness. And they're close to their headquarters. You see the range to headquarters thing
Mm-hmm.
over here up in the upper right. They're at a range of 2 and their max range is 10. So that's not a big deal. They probably, I mean, I don't need their firepower right now, right? They have no targets. I see no enemy in the defensive positions right now. So
and
I'll just go ahead and let them resupply.
they had automatically gone into that state because they reached a certain readiness
Yes,
level. Or, okay.
their readiness went down because they got smoked by a bunch of mortar
That's right.
fire,
Yeah, right. Okay.
and that dropped their readiness. So they're essentially suppressed, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
they're
Right.
recovering from that right now.
Okay.
And I think that's it. I'm not ready to move up any of the follow-on forces because I have no breaches yet. Okay, and so I'll just kind of like survey. Okay, that guy's shooting at the mortars. That guy is shooting. Looks like he's shooting HE at a defensive position. That guy is shooting HE at a defensive position. I'll let those go, and we'll just go ahead and run it.
So if the artillery units there are otherwise set to FSDC control, and then you gave them explicit orders, but they immediately
Right.
go back under control.
Right. Okay. So when they get done with the way the FSCC works is that units out there will find targets and make mission requests, and it goes into a big queue, right? And then the queue processing kind of looks like what kind of targets are they, and what kind of priority is it? Is it like an infantry squad walking across a beat field? Don't care. Is it a tank company? I care, right? And then it'll look and see who's available to shoot a mission. Now, I've been giving missions to all my guys up to this point. At some point, I'm just going to let them go to on call, and then they will start servicing missions inside the FSCCQ. And I think that's a very efficient way to do things. When I'm attacking, I tend to like to really control where my fires go. When I'm defending, the way I control fires is then I will assign and restrict fires for an artillery unit to a particular command level, like this company or that battalion or whatever. It's kind of like the notion of I'm giving priority of fires to this unit, right? And the ones I kind of think about being in general support, and they take mission requests from anywhere. I just kind of like, you know, I have them support the high headquarters, and then they'll service any request that comes in, through the FSCCQ management system. And what that does is, especially when I'm defending, it allows very responsive, high volume of fires, um, where I haven't decided like I gotta go whack this sector, really good, or these particular units really good. When that happens, and of course you can only do it during a command phase, well, you can say, well, this is a high value target like that mortar battery, so I'm gonna allocate I'm gonna allocate an asset to that. When it gets done shooting that mission, it's available for whatever. So it's kind of a balance between continuous fires during turn resolution versus pinpointed fires of things that matter to you as the player, but that's only available during during the orders phase. All right, we got smoke starting to dissipate a little bit, but there is in each of those hexes, if we pause it, which I'm going to do, and then we look at that hex and see a bunch of smoke stacked up. So each one of those is one of those smoke missions, and each one of those, has a region of time where it will last and dissipate, and there's a die roll in there. So if you want continuous smoke, at some point you're going to have, and I've had like 10 smokes in this list here sometimes, but you got to keep shooting it, because you can't say, well, I fired this smoke mission, it's this many rounds, and it's going to last 3 minutes and 32 seconds. You can't do that, right? There's a band. Right now, weather doesn't affect it, so we don't look at like the wind velocity and the air temperature and whether it's raining or not. It's just, the smoke's out there, and it's out there for a band of time. And so, what you need to think about it is just like, if you're going to say, I'm gonna fire you, when you do the smoke mission, you say, I'm going to fire this many rounds for these many minutes, and you kind of want, like 10 minutes per round, 10 rounds per minute to maintain effective smoke. It gives you enough density to give you the full protective value of the smoke.
Does smoke being in the same hex as the operating engineers affect their ability to do their job?
No, what it affects is spotting, both at the unit level and at the, this subunit shooting at that subunit level. And if it's in the hex at either end of the line of fire and not in between, you get a partial value for that. So if it's in the middle, in between, then you get full rank, because it's like the whole hex is smoked. When either the target or the shooter is in the hex of smoke, well, you don't have the whole hex deep. So there's swirling, and there's patches that are denser and lighter. And so we kind of give it a half value. One of the things I find is that it's very tempting to think, as a NATO guy, I got thermal, so smoke doesn't matter, right? On either side. But the fact is, it absolutely does matter, because not every platform has thermals, and the other guy has a scarcity of thermals. And so when you get ready to do, an assault, throwing smoke has a big impact on things, right? Because that hex before you actually do your close assault, the smoke matters, because there's a lot of systems, and we're talking like grenade launchers and machine guns and rifles, but they matter, right? RPGs, it matters whether you got smoke or not. And it's very, and going back to my professional time back, 40 years ago, that was a big thing, was like, you get used to the notion of, like, even in the squads, you've got some weapon systems with thermal sensors, and you think smoke doesn't matter, but it does. It absolutely does. And there's lessons that when you go to do operations and built up terrain, or you do infantry versus infantry, close assault at the exercise centers, sharp stick in the eye kind of lessons. But still, it was, in my view, kind of a big obstacle that a lot of folks didn't think about using smoke once thermal sensors came into view. And that's why I'm using a lot of smoke here, because it has absolutely, and I suppose really got to do this again without shooting smoke to show the difference, right? But I will tell you that I've had great force preservation of my breaching force because of using smoke. Okay, so where are we at now? Looks like we've got one breached hex. We've got one that's not breached, and I got to talk to William about that. Not sure why that's not breached. But we've got one minefield hex that is no longer a minefield. All right. We've got a couple of beat up platoons. Their full strength is 9. Got a couple of beat up platoons that right now are in one of the obstacle hexes on the company boundary between company out along the river and the next one over. They're at about 50% strength or so. A little bit. One's at about 50. One's at about 33% strength. Their full strength is 9. Looks like there is a company headquarters. That's what's left in that position. Don't see anything here. I don't know if that means they're all dead or not. Engineers, those guys are full strength. Engineers, yep, those are engineers and they're full strength. That's good, like that. All right, so now we have one lane through the minefield. I can live with that. I'd like 2 X's free, but I can live with 1. So now, I don't know if you want to pause at this point, because the next phase is going to be to crank up the 2 companies in the rear and start pushing them through.
Yeah, we can stop here, and then we can probably even splice it together later.
Yeah.
So that works for me. We can just hold off scheduling the next one. I mean, we can do same bat time, same bat station next week if you want.
Sure, that's fine.
But
no, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll just tentatively say we'll wrap it up next Friday evening around.
Okay, so is there anything you want to ask or want me to illuminate in the battle up to this point?
No, I can't think of anything right now. But if I do think of anything, I'll give you a question list and email. Maybe we can address it at the beginning.
Okay, sure. That sounds good.
But no, I think you've been answering all of my questions readily as I've been asking them. So it's been really good. This has been very good. This is very enlightening. I like seeing. I like feeling what the game is representing and simulating, right? And then I like thinking about what it doesn't do, not from a oh my god, why does this game not do it? More of it illuminates the reality of what we're trying to, show and simulate overall. As much, it's a history lesson, really, a history of what if, of course. But I love.
Well, I mean, it's
especially your input on
to a great degree, it's a history of how folks prepared for the what if.
Right, even your descriptions of the doctrine was golden material. Because, I mean, it's just something that, as a civilian, you just don't know. You don't even think about the significant differences in doctrine, and it's just interesting to hear about. And I'm very interested in what level that was taught and how that was taught and when it was taught.
Oh wow!
How it was disseminated.
Oh, that's a real pub conversation.
Oh, so you got to drink more to get. I have to get more drinks in you to get that out of you.
Not, I mean, no, it's a long conversation. I mean,
Oh yeah,
because
yeah. No, but
I
that's
mean,
what I love about wargaming in general, and in this game in particular. I think that it brings me, and I think it's one of the best games out there right now. And
I was very fortunate in my career to work for people who were movers and shakers, you know,
mm,
in
mm.
the big transformation from the late 70s to the 90s. So, you know,
Yeah, I'd love to get into a conversation about, obviously you were operating at a certain level, and you had certain, you know you were privy to some of this planning. But what I'd love to converse about is a junior officer in this same situation. How much would they have been told? How much would they have known? How would the plan have been, um, distributed to that individual? How would it
oh,
have been controlled?
okay,
Yeah,
yeah, we
yeah,
can
and
talk about
I didn't want to
point
get
point.
too deep into that while you were trying
No,
to
no,
tell
no, no, no.
me.
I understand where you're coming from, and that's an interest. It's a very interesting and how that is done in different armies is like widely different. You know,
Right.
it's a fascinating thing. You know, my personal experience was I worked for it and had um, significant emotional conversations with guys like Colonel Vasasega, who was like Mister Airland Battle Doctrine. He was like the main guy in charge of putting that together.
Hmm.
And after he did that, you know, a number of years later after he did that, he's my regimental commander. You know, and so we got to have conversations about that stuff, right? How does that how does that work down to the platoon level, and the company level,
And then
and the
how
battalion level?
does how are the contingencies? How does local command initiative interoperate within that
And
plan?
when I became a division master gunner, I worked for General Carter, who was one of the early commander operations group at NTC, and he was like considered for a very long time like the master trainer of the army because of what he did at NTC back when it was formed, and things that he put like in his training guidance or his operation orders for simulations and stuff. It was just like it crystallized things for me. You know, it's like in a training guidance, he said, like, there's so many times throughout history where it was talking about mission command before we called it mission command, but it was about mission command. And he said something along the lines of, there's been so many times in history where a battle turned on a small unit like platoon level. The people in the platoon knowing what needed to be done, seeing the opportunity to do it,
Hmm.
and doing that, and it turned the battle. And like one of the examples was when the Germans crossed the Meuse River at Sedan in May of 1940, right? And so they're stacked up in the Ardennes forest, and the French have got all these bunkers that are defending the river crossing, and they can't get across. And some platoon sergeant grabs a squad of his guys, grabs some engineers with some boats, and they cross the river. Okay, so it's like 2, 3 squads, and start reducing bunkers. And they get enough of them reduced. Now they pull an army across the river because of that action, right? And his guidance was, I want every platoon in my division to be able to do that. And I was like, wow.
What's really cool when I hear this is, and we kind of touched on it earlier in the video, was that, I mean, this is interdomain as well. Like, even for example, if you've read Hughes's Fleet Tactics, I don't know if you have read that, or not, but he talks about like Nelson at the Nile, and that,
Uh huh.
so his plans being detailed enough and then practiced to the point where the junior officers were able to, exactly like you just said, um, enact the plan in a local tactical fashion. It was interesting. I was even reading about the Battle of Saratoga last night, and in which Benedict Arnold, of all people, had a very keen eye for local initiative as well. So it's just, I just love this topic in general.
Arnold was mishandled. That's my take. He was
Uh,
mishandled. He was an
but
asset. If they'd have handled him right, and
yeah, so
there's probably personality things involved there. Who knows? But
right,
I
so
mean, guy's talented.
that's my
He was an asset, and
for
he was
some
kind of
reason
like
that's the topic
kicked to
in
the
my
curb.
brain this year is when when is local initiative seen as insubordination, and when is it seen as heroic action? This is like a master's thesis in and of itself, right?
Oh, you know what? I mean, the mileage varies. I've been on both sides of that coin, right? And largely it's about how you do it.
The results.
That's part of it. The results are not enough
Oh
because
yeah, as Arnold.
there's personalities involved, right? And so it's really easy and it's oh so tempting, right, to be a butthead to somebody you can't stand and
Right,
be successful,
right.
right? But it doesn't always turn out the way you want it to turn out. Because I mean there's a lot of dynamics there, right? And there are fine lines to tread because it's interpersonality kind of stuff. There's rank and class involved. There's it's kind of like well,
And it
you got to
never
rise high.
really.
You got to rise high enough that even somebody that's not in your rank structure or your class, depending upon where in history you're talking about, and not even not even very ancient history, right? That you've got to rise above that, group dynamic protectionism to go like it doesn't matter, shut up, you know. And I've done that and I've failed at that. It just, the mileage varies.
So
And
very
it's
good. We will
it's an interesting thing.
we will adjourn part one on that, and we will
All right.
splice this together.
All
Enjoy
right. It's
having
good
listened.
evening. Thanks,
All right.
Pete.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great talk too. Have a good one.
All right, you too.